So we looked at the training principles the other day. Now we are the first one in our journey through. We're looking at continuous training, which is also. So what are the advantages? Well, it's less demanding because. So how do we overload it? Well, there's different ways that you can overload it. What I want you to do now is I want you to have a go at choosing the correct methods. And I'll give you a hint, there are more than one. So A, B, C, or D. 5 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Time's up. Let's have a look at the correct answers. So if you said increasing the running time and changing fartlek. Yeah, so immature. So fartlek, it actually means speed play. So it translates from Swedish into speed play. So the idea of it is that it combines continuous activity with random bursts of intense or higher intensity work throughout the duration of the activity. So the advantage of it is you can alter the intensity. You can change the intensity by putting more bursts of intense work in, which will then enable both the anaerobic system and also the aerobic energy systems to be trained. So it's good in terms of like simulating, things like your Aussie rules, your netball, most of those team sports where yes, there's that aerobic base, but then you're going to have those higher intensity periods, work periods, and they may only be for 5 or 10 seconds, but still it's going to help with that sort of background for those sort of sports. It tends to be more suited to the intermediate and the advanced athletes because they have the knowledge, they have the skills to let's say put that into action, those higher intensity bursts. It's a very, it can be difficult, and like a popular application of fartlek, or an easy way to do it, is you've probably heard the term, or you've probably heard people talking about, they were doing hill sprints and that sort of stuff. So it basically running the hills, it forces the change in intensity with the person's energy systems, because yes, you're running up a hill, therefore you're going to need to run at or work at a higher intensity. So same as before, have a go at this one. How can you overload how can you overload fartlek? Is it A, increase the frequency of the intense bursts? Is it decrease the duration of the intense bursts, which is B? Is it increase the total distance covered? Do you keep the terrain the same, or do you decrease the time taken to cover the same distance? Have a go. Five seconds. 3, 2, 1. Time is up. My mouse is stuck. So here are the answers. You need to increase the frequency of the intense bursts. Okay. By increasing it, you'll be working that anaerobic system and you'll be overloading much better. Increasing the distance covered, same as the continuous training. Okay. And decreasing. So here are some example training sessions. Interval training. So put it really, really basically, it's periods of work with periods of rest, and they alternate between the two. So you can train different energy systems depending on, like it says there, the length of the work and the length of the rest period. So the the greater the rest period. So let's say you have a work to rest ratio of, I don't know, 1 to 10. That's going to be developing your ATP PC energy system. So it's going to be more anaerobically focused because you've got that, that period of, let's say, 10 seconds, but then you've got more than enough time to recover those PC stores because it takes 3 minutes to recover almost 100%. Whereas if we were to shorten the rest periods and work for, let's say, 1 minute and have 1 minute of rest, like a 1-to-1 ratio, then that's going to be more aerobic based in nature. So what you need to do is, in that initial analysis of your sport, what you need to do is you need to identify the work to rest ratio. So from that information there, then you're able to design those training sessions to better suit, and therefore applying that principle of specificity, because it then reflects more closely what the game looks like. Okay, so what you can do is you can change the variables, like it says in the dot point. You can change variables to overload the program. And this short video that I've got down the bottom corner, it basically says everything that I've already said. It's just someone else saying it, and she does go into talking about a little bit of overload. So just have a squiz at this video. Ignore the fact
Intervals
that
are
it's for
simply
women.
periods of effort followed by periods of rest. So there's a lot of different ways that you could do an interval workout. You could do it with cardiovascular training, for example, going from walking to running, or walking to sprinting, anything where the intensity is going up and coming down. You could do it with strength training movements. So you're doing bicep curls, and then you're taking a breather, and then you're doing bicep curls, and you're taking a breather. That's a form of an interval, periods of effort, periods of recovery. When it comes to the type of interval that you should choose, first of all, it depends on your goals, but also your fitness level. For example, if you're a beginner, then you probably want your recovery times to actually be longer than your working times. So for example, a beginner runner, they would maybe want to walk for 2 minutes, run for a minute, walk for 2 minutes, run for a minute. As they get stronger, they could run for longer, walk for shorter periods of time, and eventually take out all of the walking until they're finally able to do full steady state running. High intensity interval training is where you're taking the intensity very high and then bringing it back down. And again, just considering the person who's doing the exercises. If you don't feel fully recovered, then you take more recovery time. It's important that you bring your heart rate down in between intervals. And as you get more fit, you'll have less and less time that it takes for you to recover. That's a sign that your heart is actually getting stronger. So when it comes to doing interval training, just make sure that you think about the intensity that you're working and the amount of time that you're working. And remember, beginners, you want your recovery times to probably be longer than the intensity times. As you get more conditioned, your recovery times can be shorter and the intensity times can be greater.
Interval training in a nutshell. So these are some important terms that you guys will need to remember. They'll probably come up in exams, they'll come up in SACs and all that sort of stuff. So these are the key words that you need to commit to memory. Okay, so we've got our work interval. So we're talking about our work to rest, ratios there, but the work interval, it's the period of time where work is undertaken, where you're actually doing something, where you're doing the activity, whether it's push-ups, whether it's sit-ups, whether it's running, for, like it says there, 6 seconds, okay? Then the example that they're using in this table, which has been taken from your textbook and is on page 309. So this is the example they're using. So they're using a work to rest ratio of 1 to 10. And we'll look at that in a second when we get to it. So now, the rest interval, it's basically the time where you sit down, or it might be an active recovery or whatever it might be, but it's when you're not actually doing anything. So in this instance, you're resting for 60 seconds. Okay, the work intensity, again, that links to that, perceived exertion or the percentage of max heart rate. repetitions, or in brackets you'll see reps. It's okay to use the word reps as long as in the exam, you, like we've talked about in the past, you use the full word first of all and then put the bracket in the brackets rep. Okay, but it's the number of times, and hopefully hopefully most of you already understand this, and I don't need to keep, I guess, repeating it because you've done this sort of thing before. Anyway, if you haven't, I'm getting sidetracked. Reps are the number of times that the work interval is done. Okay, so in this instance, we are running 6 times. Okay, we're running 6 times for 6 seconds. All right, and then the set is the number of repetitions that make up one whole thing. So in terms of, like, if we were talking 3 sets in this example, we're talking 3 sets of 6. So we're running a total of, remember your times tables? I'll give you 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Hopefully you would have all come up with 18 times. Okay, so you're going to be running a total of 18 times because one set is doing it 6 times. All right. Interval distance, okay, 50 meters. Don't tend to hear too much of interval distance. I haven't seen too many exam questions with that, but it'll be worth keeping in the back of your mind. This is when we get to our work to rest ratios, and this is what determines which energy system is going to be used. Okay, so the work to rest ratio, I know it's maths. Nobody likes to use it, but hey, PE, we have to use it a little bit. So it's the work interval divided by the rest interval, and it gets written as a ratio. So remember, the ratio is writing something in its simplest form. So in this instance, we divide 6 by 60 and we get a work to rest ratio of 1 to 10. So for every 1 second of work, we're doing 10 seconds of rest. So the question that I'm going to ask you guys now, and if you've been paying attention, it links to what we talked about earlier. What energy system is being trained here? I'll give you 5. You should have said ATP PC, okay? You've got that 60 seconds of rest. So after 60 seconds, you should have about 70% stores. 3 minutes, you'll have about 95 to 98%. And then sort of 10 minutes, you have pretty much 100%. Okay, so the total distance is another key term. So it's the distance of each rep times the number of reps times the number of sets. Okay, so in this instance, running 50 meters and you're doing that 6 times, then you times it by 3, you get a total distance of 900 meters. And now I can't read the last 2 because my big fat head is in the way. So the recovery method is the meaning I can read there. So in this instance, is it active? Is it passive? So what sort of recovery method should you be using if we're talking about the ATP PC system? Again, 5, 4, 3. You should be using a passive recovery, okay, because you want to build those stores back up again. So you will be sitting down and just taking things quietly. So it'll be a passive recovery. And then finally, the training frequency, which is the number of times per week that the training session is repeated. And actually, I forgot that I can hide my head. In this instance, it's 3. So we are doing this session 3 times per week. Okay, so they are some of the more common interval training terms that you guys will need to remember. Really important. Especially work, rest, work intensity, definitely that one, definitely work to rest ratio, and definitely recovery method. Okay, they're the ones that tend to come up quite a lot. Yeah, you see training frequency as well. But training frequency also applies to, not just interval. It can apply to continuous, it can apply to weight training and all those different training methods as well. But definitely those are the terms. So pretty much all of them I would try and remember. Try. So this isn't in your textbook, but we're talking about the work to rest ratio. Sometimes you'll see it expressed as W to R. Okay, so depending on the sport and activity, it's going to vary, which we've already talked about. And you can see in the table there, you can see that we're talking about, the anaerobic ATP PC system. So the work interval would be up to 15 seconds, and then you might have, a 1 to 10 work to rest ratio. So you guys can do the maths on that. Then working all your way down to aerobic endurance, where your work interval, you're looking at somewhere between a 1 to 1 or a 1 to 0.3. So you're having basically the same amount of work and the same amount of rest. Because the idea is that it's meant to be a continuous activity. So it's important that through that activity analysis that you that you guys have done in class, and you will do as a practice for the hurdle sack, it's important that you're able to identify the work to rest ratio. And we looked at those tables, where you basically mark down during the period, is it a high intensity, is it low intensity, that sort of thing. So in the activity analysis, you're going to discover the work to rest ratio, so then you'll be able to design your training program to fit that specificity training principle. Okay, so like I said, this isn't specifically in your textbook. This whole thing isn't in your textbook. Okay, but it gives you an idea of what sort of work to rest ratios you need to be applying in, a given situation. So if you were given a case study for a sprinter, a 100-meter sprinter, then you would be suggesting that this one here would be key to your design of the training program. Whereas if you were looking at someone who's trying to develop aerobic endurance, then it would be down here. Okay, so this is a rough indication. Again, not in your textbook. Again, something that's not in your textbook, but these are another example sessions that you might include. So if you're looking to train the phosphate energy system, you've got an interval time of somewhere between 3 and 8 seconds. Okay, your intensity is going to be basically 100%, because that's what you're trying to work. You're trying to work that ATP PC, which we know is 100% or 95 to 100% of your max heart rate. So you might do that 8 times, 3 sets of 8. You might have a rest interval of somewhere between 40 seconds. And then, so from there, your work to rest ratio is 1 to 5. You might do that 3 times a week, and then you've got your suitable sports of 100-meter sprint, obviously. And then some team sports. You find that the team sports there tends to appear quite regularly, because, often you will have those periods of flat out, absolute 100% sprinting. And then you'll also have those longer periods where the aerobic system, obviously, because it's a team sport, is going to be the predominant supplier of energy. So interval training it's very, very good in terms of being able to suit all the different types of sports and events that are out there. So you can see your team sports appear in basically in fact they do appear in every single one of those suggested training sessions. And then you've also got your 100-meter, your 200-meter, and your athletic events there. So again, you can read the information. You don't need me to talk through it. Try and commit those to memory as well. I know it's an awful lot to remember, but this is I guess this is your lot in life for the moment. So let's move on and look at some advantages. Okay, they're highly structured, and you can change them around to add variety to the session. So you're avoiding that boredom factor. Okay, you can change it. You can have circuit, you can have weights, you can have running, you can have cycling. It can be any number of differences, and then you can train it more. Sorry, you can train more specifically by looking again, getting back to that activity analysis, looking at your games, your specific sports work to rest ratio, and then you can better train those energy systems. Okay, so it's very, very good at demonstrating that specificity. You don't need a whole heap of equipment. So you can run, you can cycle, you can walk, you can do weights if you want, but yeah, no, you don't need a great deal of equipment. A stopwatch or some kind of timer to count down. Um, so you know the advantages of interval training are, there's quite a number. Like I said, you can train any energy system, any one of them, and you saw in those tables that you can. So I haven't included every single type of interval in this PowerPoint. I figured you guys could do a little bit of reading to, break it up, make it a little bit more interesting. Also to help me try and get this out, I guess, a little bit quicker to you. But you can find some variations on interval training in your textbook. Okay, textbook, yeah, you haven't forgotten it. Page 310 to 314, and it covers things like long intervals, so that's looking at your aerobic energy systems. And then you've got your intermediate or medium interval, your short interval, looking at your ATP, PC, and then you've got your HIIT or your high intensity interval training. So what I want you to do is I want you to create your own set of notes for each of those, just so you can refer back to things. Sorry, Joel, and anyone else that was kind of hoping they'd just get all the answers given to them. I know I'm making you do a bit of work. I'm sorry. But look, it will all pay off in the long run when when I'm shaving this off, because you all averaged, or sorry, the class averaged over 50%. So now we move on to circuit training. Circuits are probably something that you guys are pretty familiar with. You've probably had at least one or two PE sessions over the years where we've set up some kind of a circuit and said, okay, well, over in this station you're going to do push-ups, over here you're going to do burpees, over here you're going to do lunges and squats and so on and so forth, and move around the gym and blah blah blah. Okay, so it's really, really good because it can develop a wide range of fitness components. You can, like it says there, you can develop your strength, your aerobic power, your anaerobic power, flexibility, and it all just depends on the type of activity that you're choosing to include in your circuit. So it involves performing a number of exercises in a sequence for a designated amount of time or for a number of repetitions. So you can see there in the picture, you've got 5 squats, then you move on to, or 5 bicycle crunches, then you move on to 5 push-ups or 5 jump ropes, jumping jacks, whatever it might be, dumbbells. You might have a rest station that you want to put in there. You can also do it for, you can have periods of 30 seconds of work followed by maybe a minute of rest. So the work to rest ratio there would be 1 to 2. So that would be looking at that sort of that aerobic, anaerobic energy systems there. So it's really, really good because you can alter the sessions to replicate the game and the requirements of those games and the energy systems and the work to rest ratios that are used, which obviously you've found that out when you've done your activity analysis. So when you're designing a circuit, you can see the dot points there. You need to look at the fitness components that you want to train, the type and the number of exercises that you're going to do, because you don't want to work too hard or not hard enough, because then it might not necessarily follow the principle of specificity in terms of meeting the energy systems and the work to rest ratios. So there are some considerations to look at there, but I mean, you've all seen circuits in the past, and we had a go at one, or you should have had a go at one last week when I set that prac for you guys. So what are the different types, and what are I guess the benefits of circuit training? So you can have different types of circuit. You can have a fixed load circuit where basically you all do the same thing. Okay, there's a 5 kilo dumbbell over on that station there, and everyone lifts 5 kilo dumbbells regardless of how easy or how hard it is. Okay, you might go over to the other station over the far side of the gym, and all of you have got to do like a minute's worth of sit-ups, 50 sit-ups or 60 sit-ups. Okay, whereas the individual load, it's more tailored to the individual. So yes, okay, I can lift 5 kilo dumbbells really, really easy, but Joel, he might struggle. He looks a bit weak in the arm. So look, we'll give him maybe 500 grams and get him to, do a similar number of repetitions, but with a much lighter weight. So that's where the individual load comes into it. And you can read a little bit more information on that on page 322 in the text. How we overload circuit training: you can increase the resistance, you can increase the number of repetitions, you can decrease the number of time taken for the repetitions. Okay, and then you can also just increase the number of laps of the circuit. So you've got to do the circuit 5 times instead of 3 times or 4 times. So what are the benefits? Well, it's very, very versatile. Like we said, you can train a large number of energy systems, okay, because you can include a large variety of exercises that obviously train each of those different energy systems. And because you've got that variety, you also have the interest levels being maintained, the motivation levels being maintained, and it becomes sort of a competitive sort of thing, maybe within individuals in the group. And you can work as many fitness components or as few fitness components as you want in that circuit. If you want to have a circuit that focuses on, your, I don't know, let's say muscular power, then you can have a circuit that is largely, plyometric based. And we will look at plyometrics, I think, in the next slide. Similarly, you can design your circuits to, whilst you might try and maintain your aerobic power, you can design it that, one of the areas that you're weak in, you can train one of those weaker fitness components and put in a few more stations around the room that focus on, let's say, I don't know, flexibility, for example. So you can include more stretching as well. So they're the types and the benefits of training. And if you want to have a bit more of a read of that, it's 321 and 322 in your textbook. Plyometrics, like I said, so it's a form of strength training, and its primary focus is developing that power. Okay, so what happens is you take a traditional kind of, like, if you look at the picture up there, here, that one. If you look at the picture there, he's taken a normal push-up, very boring, straightforward push-up, and he has, put the clap into it. Okay, so basically what's happening is he's got the boring push-up, and he's got a rapid, like a really, really quick eccentric, which is that lengthening of the muscle, okay, which is where you develop the greatest amount of force. Okay, so it's it's really, really good in developing that power aspect of, you know, of the game, of the event. Things like, you know, sports like basketball and netball and football, they would all have high plyometric demands. So, you know, those of you that play any of those sports, you probably would agree. I'm hoping you'd agree. I don't play any of those sports, but there would be a lot of, you know, leaping and jumping and hopping and all that sort of stuff. You can see there in the background, you've got there what's called depth jumps. So jumping up onto the box and then off the box, or maybe over the box. It's just, yeah. So the key component to this is that speed aspect. And we know from talking about the fitness components earlier that muscular power is a combination of strength, which is the maximal contraction, and speed. Okay, so it's strength done really quickly. Okay, you know, it's not a slow, gentle jump. It's an explosive, happens right now kind of thing. So the considerations and benefits. You really need to have a solid base to begin with this sort of program. If you don't, then you know what's going to happen is potentially injury. Okay, that's the number one thing. All right, because of that, the powerful contractions, you might find there's tearing and straining of hamstrings. So what you might want to do is start with some of the less stressful things to warm yourself up into it. Okay, so skipping, hopping, and then progress to those more demanding sort of things. You need to make sure that you're taking into account things like the shock of it all. Okay, so like it says there, train on shock absorbing surfaces. So you do it on something like grass instead of concrete, or you do it if you have access to some kind of, you know, rebound kind of surface like a gymnastics studio, if you can. Okay, that would be awesome. Okay, because it is quite taxing on the body. It is quite high impact. So unless you know, are able to absorb the shock quite well, there is that risk that you know, you will injure yourself, and you need that recovery time between sessions. So they recommend that about 48 hours to allow the muscle recovery. So specifically, it trains, if we're looking at specificity, it trains those movements in the game situations where there's a lot of leaping and jumping and that sort of thing. And so it doesn't need a whole heap of equipment. I mean, you could do it with stuff that you have lying around the house. You don't even need equipment. Like we said, like you saw in that previous slide, the guy doing the push-ups. You don't need any equipment for push-ups. You don't really need any equipment to, you know, you can just pretend you're jumping over a box. Okay, it is quite an easy thing to, I guess, do. I don't know. I was trying to think of a better word, but basically, yeah, do. It's an easy thing to do. Flexibility. So, number of sports. You show me any sport that doesn't require flexibility. Okay. Yeah, it helps prevent injury. It helps in performing actions as well, in terms of like being mobile and agile. It's crucial to a lot of sports. It prevents injury. So flexibility training, it forms part of an athlete's training program throughout the entire year. Okay, you know, it can be done in a variety of different ways. Okay, so if you look on page 323, we have, you know, static stretching, where you've all done static stretching before. It's where, you know, okay, lean up against the wall and, you know, I want you to stretch your quadriceps, or, you know, I want you to stretch your gastrocnemius, so your calves, or, you know, whatever you want to call them. Okay, That's the sort of thing that you would have seen plenty of times. Okay, static stretching, where you hold the stretch for, the textbook says 10 seconds, but you know, we've always been told that you should be holding it longer than that, 20, 30 seconds. Okay. Then you have your dynamic and your ballistic stretching. Okay, so the dynamic stretching, like its name says there, it's more specific to the game. It more closely represents the game kind of thing. So you would have seen, you know, the AFL footballers swinging their legs through its full range of motion, you know, pretending to kick the ball and that sort of thing. Okay, so that's what dynamic stretching is, and then you have ballistic stretching, which basically is taking that dynamic stretch and just taking it that range further again. And this can be quite dangerous for let's say untrained people to take it, you know, that little bit too far, because potentially, you know, you can injure yourself by taking the stretch too far. So, you know, we've got our two people, three people, I don't know, it's two people. I definitely wouldn't be attempting the splits. I would probably end up, I'd say, tearing my pants first of all, and then, you know, God knows what else would happen to other important parts of my body, or at least that's what I think would happen. So definitely won't be trying that, and I definitely wouldn't recommend what the young girl down there is doing either. That would take a lot of flexibility training. That being said, there is nothing, I mean, aside from the obvious, you know, age and gender and that sort of stuff, and as you age, you become less flexible, blah, blah, blah. But there is nothing stopping you from improving the levels of flexibility that you have currently. Okay, so, you know, we used to do sit and reach tests at my previous setting. We've even done sit and reach tests at you know, Kurrajong. And I've had people that haven't even been able to touch their toes, yet I've got guys and girls, more so the girls, that can almost reach the end of the box, which is something like, you know, plus 30, 35, 40 centimeters beyond their feet. There's nothing stopping you stretching regularly, and gradually you will improve your results. Okay, it's all about training. It's all about improving and overloading. Okay, so that, I mean, that's essentially what flexibility training is. Oh, actually no, we left out proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, or PNF stretching. PNF stretching, it is in the book, it's not in this, but PNF stretching it's usually done with a partner. Okay, so you would have seen, you know, stretching with two people, and it might be one person lying on their back with leg in their air, one leg in the air. I'm not going to demonstrate it, but the person would put their leg up in the air, the other person would provide a resistance. Okay, and you would take the leg back to, or it doesn't have to necessarily be the leg, it can be the arm as well, but you would take it back to the point of, you know, a little bit of discomfort, and then you'd hold it there for about 6 to 10 seconds whilst also pushing isometrically. So you're holding the stretch in the arm, in the arm. We're talking about the leg at the moment using an arm, but you'd be holding that stretch at that point of discomfort, but also trying to push down on that partner. If you're using the arm, you'd have, you know, the person holding the arm back while you're trying to push your arm forward. Okay, then what would happen is you would relax, and then you would take that stretch back that little bit further again and do the same process, and just repeat that a few times. So you gradually stretching the muscle with a partner's help. Okay, we already talked about this, but I'll go over some of it again anyway. So static stretching, like I said, that's the one where you hold it, you do it, you know, against the wall, or you have you know, whatever it might be. Sitting down, stretching hamstrings, quadriceps, adductors, that sort of stuff. It's the safest, it's the simplest form of stretching, and you can take a joint to its full range of motion and hold it for about, it says 10 plus, I would say, you know, at least 20 seconds. Okay, you have slow active stretching, which involves moving the body part as far as possible and then contract the agonist while relaxing the antagonist. So if we remember the agonist is the muscle that's doing the work, and the antagonist is the one working opposite. So if we're talking bicep and tricep, you know, your agonist in, let's say, a bicep curl is going to be the one that's shortening, which is the bicep. Okay, so the upward phase of the bicep curl, the agonist is the bicep, and the antagonist is the one that relaxes, which is the tricep. We talked about proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, or PNF, and we've also talked about ballistic stretching. So I don't need to go into either of those. We can move on quickly. I think this is the last one we have to cover. Weight training. So it's also called resistance training, and it's a widely used form of strength. Okay, and it improves maximum strength. It improves muscular power. So it's that strength done, you know, quickly. Okay, and you can also work it to improve your muscular endurance. Okay, so it just depends on the setup of the entire program. Okay, so the aim is to increase the force that the muscle can exert. Okay, and some of the terminology that you're going to hear quite a bit, and it goes back to also that interval training. So you've heard about repetition, you've heard about sets. Okay, so a repetition is one performance of an exercise. So it might be, you know, a bicep curl. Okay, it might be, you know, a lat pull down, something like that. The set is obviously how many of those repetitions. So you might do 3 sets of 5 reps, for example. Okay, let's just, you know, doodle that here. So we've got 3, wow, that's terrible, sets. I should be, you know, doing it on the computer. I say that all the time, but I prefer this. 3 sets times 5 reps. And that equals a total of how many altogether? I'll give you 3 seconds because you should be able to do it. You're doing it 15 times. God, I hope my maths is right because that'd be embarrassing. So then we have our resistance. So the resistance is actually the amount that's going to be moved. Okay, so how much weight? Is it 5 kilos? Is it 500 kilos? Speaking of 500 kilos, I was watching a video tonight on the news. It must have been a slow news day, even with all this coronavirus crap. He was a Russian weightlifter who I think it was 500 kilos, 400 kilos, can't remember, but it was a lot of weight. He broke both his knees trying to do it. It didn't look, I guess it didn't look bad, but yeah, basically the knees buckled underneath him. So go and Google it if you know, looking for something kind of gross to look at. So that's resistance. Then you've got repetition maximum, or RM, which is the maximum load that a muscle can lift in a given number of times. So if I said to you, I want you to, you know, give me 1 RM, so 1 repetition maximum, what I'm saying to you is, I want you to go there and I want you to lift the heaviest weight that you can possibly lift once. Okay, you shouldn't be able to lift it twice. You shouldn't be able to lift it 3 or 4 times. You should be able to lift it once, just 1. Okay, so, you know, for some people that might be 400 kilos. It might be 20 kilos. It differs from person to person, but 1 RM is the maximum load a muscle can lift in a given number of times. Whereas if I said to you, I want you to do, like the example there, 3 RM, I want you to lift the weight that you can lift 3 times, not 4, not 2, 3. Okay, so there's some common terms that, you know, you will see and need to know. So specificity, we can change a lot of the variables and a lot of the things around with weight training. Okay, we can change the muscle actions involved. We can focus on eccentric contractions, which is a lengthening phase. We can also focus on the shortening phase, which is a concentric. We can work on the speed, the range of motion, the muscle groups. We can train the energy systems, the intensity. So muscles only get stronger when you force them beyond their normal intensity. So this is where we're talking about our overload. So if we want to overload in weight training, we need to increase the number of reps, the number of sets, or we increase the weight. All right, and with the principle, you don't excuse me, you don't overload all three. You only do one at a time. So you might increase the number of reps, or you might increase the number of sets, or you might increase the weight. Okay, you don't do all three. Bad news. So here is a table, and I'm pretty sure this comes straight out of your textbook. I have to find it on the page. Hey, I turned to it. Page 316. There is also over on the next page on 317, there are some examples of some exercises that you can do. Okay, so look, here's the book. Whoop, I'm doing it wrong. There you go. So depending on the outcome that you want, okay, do you want muscular hypertrophy? Hypertrophy means, you know, growing bigger. Okay, do you want bigger muscles? So you should be doing somewhere between 70 and 85% of a repetition max. So 8 to 12 reps. You might do 1 to 3 sets, and they'll be slow to moderate speed, and you'll have a bit of rest in between. Okay, if you're looking at doing power, then you're doing a lot less, but you're also doing them as fast as possible. Okay, and that, look, it also depends on whether you're a novice or whether you're intermediate too. I forgot to mention that. But you can see how it changes there. If you're looking to, you know, build strength, build muscle, you are going to be working close to that 100% repetition maximum. So, you know, we're looking at a 1 RM. Okay, it varies from person to person. So, you know, commit some of those to memory. Obviously, you don't need to commit all of them to memory, but it is definitely something that you will need to keep in mind when you are designing your training program if you go down the route of using weight training. Yeah, did I scare you? Okay, so question taken from the VCAR exam 2019. It's looking at a training program, which you're going to have to do. It's looking at lead climbers. So we're looking at rock climbing, and it's aiming to improve muscular endurance. So what you need to do is, obviously, you need to examine the information that's being given to you there, and then you need to critique the training program. So it's asking you to look for the positives, it's asking you to look for any negatives, and then what can you do to improve those negatives and turn them into something that is a positive. Okay, so it's worth 3 marks. I will give you, I know it's a short amount of time, but I'll give you 1 minute to come up with some sort of response. Just put it in dot points. And I promise I won't scare you again. 30 seconds. Ten to go. 3, 2, 1 times up. Okay, so let's have a look at what the examiners in their report said and how they marked it. So if we look at it there, an average of 1.4. Okay, only 15% of the state managed to get the full 3 marks. The rest, they didn't do so well. When I say so well, it's sort of split 30%. What you needed to do was you needed to give, like I said, you need to give a positive, you need to give negative, and then you need to give a way to possibly improve that negative and turn it into a positive. Okay, so those that couldn't do any of that, obviously you didn't get the marks, all right? One of the suggested marks or suggested responses, down here, it says that it's generally appropriate. If you go back to that table and look at the table, it suggested that between 15 and 25 repetitions. So if you look at the table, we're talking, 10 repetitions for pull-ups. Probably not the best indicator for improving muscular endurance, but it's not bad in terms of what's been presented. Okay, the one that sort of stands out like dog's balls, if you will excuse the language, is the bench press. Okay, you're doing 3 repetitions, which is a long way off of any sort of muscular endurance improvements, and there is a massive amount of rest between those two. Okay, so like it says there, you'd be wanting to change that number there from 3 to somewhere to be 15 to 25 repetitions. Okay, so that's how you would critique the training program in terms of its effectiveness. So you've got the positive, you've said yes, it's pretty good. The negative is that the bench press isn't appropriate, and this is how you can improve it, and that is how you would get your 3 marks. I thought about scaring you, but I'm just trying to make it interesting for you, Joel. Final. Last slide, promise. I just want you to do the chapter review questions on page 324 and submit them in Teams. Thanks for watching and good luck.